Like our video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content.
The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be the tournament where Vinicius Jr. finally silenced his harshest critics on the biggest stage in football. And for most of one night in Miami, that's exactly what happened. But sandwiched between two genuinely brilliant goals was a moment that's left Brazilian fans, former players, and pundits across multiple broadcasts genuinely divided. So what actually happened in the 22nd minute against Scotland, and why does this decision matter so much beyond a single disallowed goal? Let's break it down. Start with the background, because the context surrounding this match mattered enormously to both teams involved, and it shapes how every decision inside it gets interpreted. This was the third and final round of Group C fixtures, played at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens, with both Brazil and Scotland walking into the match with something genuine at stake. Brazil had already secured passage into the new round of 32, but the result would determine whether they topped the group outright. For Scotland, the stakes were considerably higher and more nerve-wracking. They needed at least a point to all but guarantee reaching the World Cup knockout stages for the first time in the nation's history, a genuinely historic milestone for a country with passionate support, but a recent record of falling agonizingly short on the biggest stages. It's worth pausing on just how significant that potential milestone was for Scottish football specifically. Despite decades of passionate domestic support and a fan base regularly ranked among the most enthusiastic traveling supporters in the sport, Scotland had never once advanced beyond the group stage at a men's World Cup. Every previous qualification had ended in early elimination, often by the narrowest of margins, leaving generations of Scottish supporters waiting for a breakthrough that always seemed to stay just out of reach. This World Cup's expanded format, with its new round of 32 and the additional pathway via third-place qualification, had given Scotland a genuinely realistic chance at finally rewriting that history, which only heightened the emotional stakes attached to a fixture against one of the tournament's outright favorites. Brazil, under head coach Carlo Ancelotti, had built their campaign throughout the group stage around the resurgent form of Vinicius Jr., the Real Madrid forward who arrived at this tournament under significant pressure. Despite his sustained brilliance at club level, Vinicius had managed just 6 goals in 39 previous appearances for the senior national team under earlier coaching regimes, a statistic that had become a recurring talking point among critics who questioned whether his club form could ever genuinely translate to a Brazil shirt. Ancelotti's appointment changed that calculus almost immediately. In just 13 appearances under the Italian coach, Vinicius had already scored 7 times heading into this fixture, numbers that told a very different story from his earlier international career. This matters because it set up a match where one player's individual redemption arc and one nation's historic ambitions were both riding on the same 90 minutes, and a single VAR decision in the first half ended up becoming the most discussed moment of the entire night, regardless of how the scoreline eventually finished. Here's where things get interesting, because the actual sequence of events unfolded with a speed and inevitability that made the controversy land even harder once it arrived. Brazil needed only 7 minutes to open the scoring, and it came from a mistake rather than a moment of individual brilliance. Scotland defender Scott McKenna gifted the ball directly to Vinicius, who rounded goalkeeper Angus Gunn and slotted home calmly to put Brazil ahead. Then, in the 22nd minute, lightning appeared to strike twice. Another defensive error, this time from Jack Hendry, saw the Scotland centre-back hesitate in possession deep inside his own half. Vinicius pounced immediately, won the ball cleanly, raced through on goal, and finished calmly past Gunn for what looked, in the moment, like a clinical second goal built entirely on Scottish defensive fragility. Brazil's celebrations didn't last long. Mexican referee Cesar Ramos was advised by the VAR booth to review the incident on the pitch-side monitor, and after consulting the replay, he ruled that Vinicius had committed a foul on Hendry in the act of winning the ball, disallowing what would have been a crucial second goal at a pivotal moment in a match Scotland desperately needed to navigate carefully. Television replays shown immediately afterward captured Vinicius's visible fury at the decision, gesturing animatedly towards Ramos as he protested what he clearly felt was an injustice, a reaction that only added to the sense among Brazilian supporters watching around the world that something had gone wrong with the call. The reaction across broadcast studios was immediate and genuinely split, which is part of why this incident has generated so much sustained discussion rather than fading quickly. On one of the BBC's broadcasts, commentator Steve Crossman described it plainly as a foul, adding that Vinicius catches Hendry and that it represented, in his view, the correct decision. Former Scotland international James McFadden offered a similar reading, acknowledging it felt like a let-off for his country, but conceding that if it was indeed a foul, the officials were right to rule it out regardless of the broader context. But that's only part of the story, because not everyone watching reached the same conclusion, and some of the dissenting voices carried real weight given their own backgrounds in the game.
Former Brazil international Lucas Leiva, working as a pundit in the studio, pushed back directly against the consensus forming around him. "For me, it's not a foul. Great press. It could be 2-0, he said, acknowledging the need to hear from refereeing experts, but making clear his own instinct was that Brazil had been hard done by. Former Scotland international Rachel Corsie offered the most detailed breakdown of where the actual controversy lay, explaining that the core argument hinges on timing. The contention is that contact was initiated before Vinicius actually touched the ball, meaning he wasn't yet in control of it when he made contact with the Scottish defender, a sequence she described as incredibly fortunate for Scotland, regardless of how the letter of the law was ultimately applied. This matters because it captures exactly the kind of marginal, frame-by-frame judgment call that VAR was originally introduced to clean up, yet so often ends up generating fresh controversy over instead. The disagreement here wasn't about whether contact occurred. Everyone agreed it had. The disagreement was about sequencing, whether Vinicius's challenge for the ball came before or alongside his physical contact with Hendry, a distinction measured in fractions of a second that nonetheless determined whether Brazil's lead doubled at a crucial juncture or stayed at a single goal, with Scotland still very much alive in the match. It's worth putting this in some historical context, because VAR controversies involving marginal contact, fine offside margins, and split-second sequencing have become an almost expected feature of every World Cup since the technology's introduction at the 2018 tournament in Russia. That edition introduced the system to widespread fanfare, promising to eliminate exactly this kind of contested, game-changing error. Instead, decisions over handballs, marginal contact, and offside calls by mere centimeters have generated fresh debate at every subsequent World Cup, including the heavily scrutinized tournament in Qatar 4 years ago, where several high-profile matches turned on decisions that divided pundits in remarkably similar fashion to what's happened here. What makes the technology's record at this specific tournament notable is the sheer frequency of these moments, a pattern that's defined the group stage across multiple matches and multiple confederations, suggesting the fundamental tension between split-second human judgment and frame-by-frame video analysis remains as unresolved in 2026 as it was when VAR first arrived 8 years ago. The bigger issue here connects to a broader pattern that's defined VAR's relationship with this tournament since its opening matches. Decisions involving marginal contact, fine offside margins, and split-second sequencing have repeatedly divided pundits and fans throughout this World Cup, regardless of which nations are involved. What makes this particular incident stand out is the stakes layered on top of it, a result that mattered enormously to Scotland's historic ambitions, combined with a Brazilian superstar whose own redemption story added an extra emotional dimension to how the decision landed with neutral observers. Let's make this human for a moment, because behind the VAR debate were two sets of players experiencing wildly different emotions by the final whistle. For Vinicius personally, the disallowed goal barely slowed him down. Just before halftime, he rose highest inside the penalty area to power home a header that restored Brazil's 2-goal cushion with a finish that, this time, left absolutely no room for controversy or review. Brazil added a third goal after the break through Mateus Cunha, completing a comfortable 3-0 victory that confirmed their place atop Group C heading into the knockout rounds. Speaking afterward, Vinicius reflected directly on the criticism that had followed him into this tournament. "I had faith that I was going to improve for the talent that I have," he said. "I was sure that at the right moment I would shine again with the Brazilian team shirt." He added that there were always times when I couldn't show my football, describing the feeling of finally delivering on the international stage as bringing a certain relief. He went further still, promising his form would continue trending upward as the tournament progressed, saying he would also evolve and improve in the competition, and that the hope only increases between us, between our fans, and between our family.
His header against Scotland also placed him in genuinely elite historical company. By scoring in all 3 of Brazil's group stage matches, Vinicius became the first Brazilian to achieve that feat since Ronaldo and Rivaldo back in 2002, and before them, only Jairzo in 1970 and Romario in 1994 had managed the same thing. Every single one of those previous instances ended with Brazil lifting the World Cup trophy that same year, a historical coincidence Brazilian fans have already begun pointing to with considerable excitement. His 4 goals through the group stage also put him second outright in the race for the tournament's Golden Boot, level with Kylian Mbappe and Erling Haaland, and trailing only Lionel Messi's 5. Ancelotti himself spoke with obvious pride about his forward's transformation under his guidance, noting he had no question in his mind about how far Vinicius would come by the time this World Cup arrived. "It makes him happy to play for the national team," the Italian coach said. "He's doing a brilliant job." That relationship between player and coach, forged across 4 trophy-laden years together at Real Madrid before continuing onto the international stage, has become one of the genuine subplots of Brazil's entire campaign, with Ancelotti's specific tactical setup and public confidence repeatedly credited by Vinicius himself as the difference between his earlier, more frustrating international career and the player currently lighting up this tournament. For Scotland, the mood afterward was understandably heavier, even with their tournament fate still mathematically alive. Their manager spoke candidly about the night, acknowledging his team had probably been fortunate to have the second goal disallowed, while lamenting that they conceded at poor moments against a team capable of real quality. He praised his players' effort while admitting they were short on the technical level required at this stage, adding that the squad felt empty after the result, but that the journey, at least for now, wasn't necessarily over. Scotland's progression now depends on results elsewhere in the tournament, specifically whether they finish among the 8 best third-place teams across all 12 groups under this World Cup's newly expanded format. A genuinely nervous weight that adds its own layer of tension to how this single refereeing decision will be remembered if their campaign ultimately ends in heartbreak. So where does this leave the broader conversation heading into the knockout stage? The most likely outcome is that this specific incident gets filed alongside the tournament's other VAR controversies as another example of the technology's persistent struggle with marginal judgment-based calls, rather than clear-cut factual decisions like offside margins or ball-over-line situations. Brazil's result wasn't ultimately affected by the decision in any meaningful way, given their comfortable final scoreline, which has limited the controversy's staying power somewhat compared to incidents that directly altered a result. The more significant question is whether Scotland's tournament survives this round of fixtures at all. If they do advance via the third-place qualification route, this disallowed goal will likely be remembered as a genuine moment of fortune that kept their historic ambitions alive during an otherwise difficult night in Miami. If they don't advance, the conversation will almost certainly circle back to this exact sequence, with Scottish fans wondering what might have unfolded differently in a match where a 2-goal deficit, rather than a 1-goal gap, might have changed their entire approach and mentality for the remainder of the contest. There's also a wider question worth considering about how this kind of incident shapes perceptions heading into the knockout rounds, where every decision carries amplified weight given the single elimination stakes involved. Brazil now advances into the new round of 32 as Group C winners, a position that, depending on the final third-place rankings, could hand them a more favorable path through the bracket than if results elsewhere had gone differently. Whether Vinicius's continued red-hot form holds up against increasingly difficult opposition as the tournament progresses remains the genuinely open question for Brazilian supporters, particularly given how directly his rediscovered confidence appears tied to Ancelotti's specific tactical trust and public backing throughout this campaign. For Vinicius and Brazil, the bigger picture extends well beyond any single refereeing decision. Ancelotti's tactical trust and his public backing of his star forward have visibly transformed Vinicius's relationship with the national team shirt, and a coach who guided him to global stardom at club level now appears to be doing exactly the same thing on the international stage at precisely the tournament where it matters most. Whether that form and that trust carries Brazil all the way to a 6th World Cup title remains to be seen, but the redemption arc playing out in real time has already become one of the genuine highlight stories of this tournament's group phase. So, here's where things stand. Brazil topped Group C with a comfortable win. Vinicius silenced years of pointed criticism with a historic scoring run matched only by 3 of Brazil's greatest ever forwards, and one disputed VAR decision in the 22nd minute has left pundits, former players, and fans still arguing about contact, sequencing, and fairness more than a day after the final whistle.